Good morning, my fellow Martians. Welcome to another episode of Mixed Martian Arts. My name is Austin Shaper, and this is a daily show where we explore the topics of UAP, UFC, and World War III. Today is going to be a World War III geopolitical episode, and before we dive into today's content, do me a favor and click subscribe on the video. It's something free and easy you can do that really helps me grow my channel. I appreciate you guys so much for tuning in. Diving into today's topic, we've got all kinds of nonsense coming out of North Korea, and normally I would not cover something like this coming from North Korea because they have been making veiled threats to the United States, to the West, for so many decades now. Little Rocket Man, Kim Jong-un, the short, fat dictator who thinks he's some sort of demigod overlording over his people, has always had this kind of relationship with the United States, and his family before him has as well. It's always been rocky tensions ever since the Korean War, after World War II, which my grandpa actually fought in the Korean War, a little fun fact. But the reason why I'm covering today's development is because it's getting to a level of seriousness that I feel that this crisis, and that's what it is a crisis, it's going to come to a head at some point in the near future. And we've got a lot of problems. The West, the United States, has a lot of problems simultaneously happening all over the globe. You have the tensions with Israel and Iran. You've got Iran getting very dangerously close to possessing a nuclear weapon. And that is what scares me so much. Well, one of the things that scares me so much about the development of nuclear weapons is that when it's scary enough that powers like China and the United States even and Russia have possession of weapons so dangerous that if something were to go awry and a war were to pop off, they can create World War II levels of casualties in a matter of minutes. That is a horrifying thought. And it gets even scarier when countries like Iran, which supposedly is yet to possess one, but North Korea in particular, it's even scarier when a crazy loon of a dictator has possessions of this, because it leads us into the most strange, uncharted territory. Because without North Korea possessing weapons of this magnitude, they would be essentially defenseless against superpowers such as the United States, such as NATO. They would be virtually powerless to resist anything that we want to do, any change that we want to impact into the Korean Peninsula, into the region. But because he possesses these nuclear weapons, and albeit there's a solid chance that many of those weapons don't work, you guys know that he's been shooting off ballistic missiles into the sea time and time again over the past few years, especially. He's really been turning that up, and even to the point where Japan, it got close enough to Japan that they had to issue, alerts on everybody's phones and have them run for shelter. And this has happened time and time again. And it's very unsettling because at the end of the day, as I said, I do think this is going to come to a head. I wouldn't normally cover a threat from North Korea because they've happened so often, and it seems like they're kind of empty, hollow threats. And we know that, I guess we can't say this with 100% certainty, but it's a pretty fair assessment to say that North Korea, while they do make threats constantly, in all likelihood, I don't believe that they would make a move without the authority granted by their overlords in China mainly, and Russia as well. I think Russia's defense minister made a visit to North Korea soon, trying to coax them into giving more weapons to the Russia-Ukraine war. And I think Shogu had even said North Korea has turned themselves into the most powerful, I think he said most powerful land army or army in general in the world. That is such a nonsensical statement. It's absolutely ridiculous. But today, it's getting to this crisis point. I mean, let's just read some news here. This comes from Global Military Info on Twitter, and it says, breaking: North Korea has released an ominous warning stating that they are waiting for the right moment to punish South Korea and the United States for conducting joint military exercises. They are not ruling out a thermonuclear war due to the recent trilateral agreement between Japan, South Korea, and the United States. This is an agreement where the more that it's an escalating situation in the sense that the more tension that happens in the Korean Peninsula, both sides kind of dig their heels in, and now you've got the United States and Japan and South Korea doing all kinds of training exercise, some that are the biggest that we've ever seen in our lifetime near the Korean Peninsula. And all this does is irk the North Korean dictator and military. And it's getting to this crisis point where, while I don't believe that North Korea is the most dangerous threat to the United States, what I do think is that they are the most likely, this is one of the most dangerous flashpoints. And the reason why is because I think you compare this to Russia-Ukraine conflict, the potential of that turning into a global war, China-Taiwan, which is yet to happen, but is very much so still at play, and then Iran-Israel and many other countries, but those are the main ones. And I believe that North Korea is one of the most likely flashpoints to pop off first. And while I don't think that they would do it without being granted the permission from China and Russia, because they know, they're not stupid, as crazy as the dictator Kim Jong-un is, he's not dumb enough to believe he can win any sort of conflict on the Korean Peninsula against the United States or Japan, or even probably South Korea because of who backs South Korea. They can't do it alone. Now, what they could do is create a giant issue where, because of this flashpoint going hot and going kinetic in any regard, be it a nuclear weapons test, and we draw a line in the sand and say no more of this shit. I mean, it's honestly been pretty alarming to me how we've allowed them to be shooting missiles into the sea constantly and scaring the shit out of the Japanese population. It's kind of amazed me that nothing has happened at this point. But where it gets very dicey is that if North Korea does make any sort of a reckless move, it could trigger a domino effect with China and Taiwan and Russia and Ukraine. It could really trigger something that once it began, it could be very hard to turn the dial back. It could be very difficult to put the cat back in the bag, so to speak. Breaking news, North Korea is planning major military provocations in the coming days. Intelligence agencies say that it had detected unusual activity at North Korean military facilities. A few funny responses from people. Neil Gronveld on Twitter says the drill scheduled for 2 p.m. on Wednesday, so tomorrow, August 23rd, will see many drivers required to pull over to the side of the roads and exits. So basically, they're making way for the military to do whatever it is that these crazy asses are going to do. And then in response, this is the tit for tat that happens in this geopolitical chess game, is that the more we press on them, the more drills we do, the more training exercise we do surrounding the peninsula, the crazier Kim Jong-un and even his sister comes out, the crazier the statements that are made, and then it's just this tit for tat. They start shooting more missiles into the sea, and then in retaliation for them doing reckless behavior such as that, we retaliate by doing even more profound and sophisticated and giant drills all over the peninsula. And it just has this effect where it has not reached a kinetic point yet. Many would argue it never will, because Kim Jong-un is just talking out of his ass and that he's never actually going to pull the trigger. I kind of disagree. I can see the argument because the past would show us that he's largely full of it and he is not going to make a move. I mean, I was surprised back in the day when that amazing movie, The Interview, came out with James Franco and Seth Rogen, one of the best movies ever, comedy-wise. And I was always surprised that nothing happened at that point, because, I mean, Kim Jong-un had to watch that movie, right? He had to watch it and just, I wonder if he laughed. I mean, I would imagine he was furious, but he never did anything back then. So he's been offended. He's been pushed into a corner. And it's his own doing, because at the end of the day, the dude is crazy. And it's just profoundly disturbing that while America intervenes in wars due to what they tell us is a moral cause, we want to defend democracy, we want to defend freedom, we largely have kind of left North Korea up to their own devices, and I think that's just due to the fact that the crazy ass has nukes. Once you have nukes, man, a severely understrength nation can actually compete in a sense with a bigger nation such as the United States, because nobody wants to open Pandora's box of nuclear war. So although it's 100% that we would win that war, the casualties and the devastation and the turmoil they could inflict with even one nuclear weapon reaching the mainland, and at this point I think suffice it to say it is possible that they could reach at least the western seaboard of the United States with one of these horrid weapons that they have. And, they're threatening thermonuclear war. North Korea says it's waiting for the right moment to punish the United States and South Korea, warning of an outbreak of thermonuclear war. Beacon of North on Twitter says it's very concerning. It's an open threat. Shay says, North Korea, can someone just kill that lunatic of a dictator? And that's the shitty thing. These guys have kill switches where if you were to even take out Kim Jong-un, it's very likely that a equally as crazy maniac will take his place. And it's also very possible that he has kill switch. I think it's called a dead man switch, where even if you were to take him out, he would have orders to fire off all the nuclear weapons that he possesses. And let's say most of them, let's say 90% of them are duds. If one of them is accurate, one of them is able to actually explode and hit its target, man, you're opening Pandora's box. And I think that when the war does break out, when World War III does break out, which I do believe, unfortunately, I don't mean to be negative here, but I do believe if you look at human history, it is an eventuality. Hopefully not in our lifetime, but I think that's a very optimistic take. I think in all likelihood, it's very likely that this war will break out within the next few years. I would be dead shocked if it didn't happen in the next 5 to 10. I would be honestly very, very surprised. There's just too much going on. There's too many flashpoints. And it's funny, Dan Microwave on Twitter says, just like that guy in school waiting for the right moment to ask the girl out, it's never going to happen, bro. Yeah, I mean, the threats have come in for years and years and years, but definitely he has been doing more weapons tests than he ever has in recent memory. And back even in the Trump era, when Trump first got into office, we actually heard about this when he left office. He said that we were so close to a conflict between North Korea and the United States, the closest we'd ever been. And, he said that he was able to meet with Kim Jong-un and, settle the dispute that they have. Obviously, South Korea is largely funded by the United States, and they want to be a democracy, and they're sitting there right there on the border with North Korea. And that's another thing that always blows my mind. It's like it's so different, and we got so lucky in the United States placement in the world geographically, because we have oceans on both sides. Yes, granted, we have Mexico above us and Mexico below us and Canada above us. And other than that, those are both somewhat allies, and we have oceans. We have the Atlantic and the Pacific separating us by thousands of miles of our potential adversaries. Imagine if, like Europe, and it kind of leads you to the understanding of why these conflicts always seem to start in Europe, is because they're landlocked in with their adversaries. There's no breathing room. And with North Korea and South Korea, they're right there across the demilitarized zone. They're just a rock's throw away from each other. And when you guys have a dictator and facing his adversary that close, the tensions are constantly going back and forth. Whereas, America, imagine if we had a land bridge from America to China. Imagine how different the situation would be. We likely would have already been in a conflict long ago. Now, as I mentioned, I don't think the main threat is that North Korea possesses any real threat to the existence of the United States. I don't think they can nuke us into oblivion. I don't think that for a moment, but I do think they could cause absolute mayhem. And again, if they were to even shoot one nuclear weapon, let's say it misses its target, lands into the ocean. Do you know what it's going to do to the stock markets? Do you know what it's going to do to the economy? Do you know what it's going to do to society? And once the first one is shot, it's in all likelihood, it's going to open up Pandora's box for other countries to be able to do it and say, option A, we retaliate with our own nuclear weapon, or some sort of invasion of the Korean Peninsula, or option B, we do nothing. Option B, we do nothing could lead to countries such as China and Russia being like, okay, so we've learned that America is a paper tiger. North Korea can act a fool and start firing weapons at them, and they're actually not going to do anything besides maybe economic sanctions and come out and condemn the actions of North Korea, but they're not going to take actual military kinetic action. I don't believe that's true. I believe option A is more likely. I do think we would retaliate. I think that when you compare the situation with Russia and China, the risk of retaliating is obviously much more grave, because then you're opening up actual World War III. And in my opinion, there is a secret deal, maybe not so secret deal, treaty, whatever you want to call it, a military alignment, an agreement between both Russia, North Korea, Iran, and China. I believe that if any of these powder kegs was lit, the fuse was lit, and North Korea maybe leads the way in that, maybe Iran leads the way, I think it very much so would drag in the big boys. Similar to how World War I unfolded, how you had, was it Serbia and Austria-Hungary, and then that ended up dragging Russia and Germany into the war, which then in turn ended up dragging Britain into the war, and then before you know it, the United States is involved. So at the end of the day, do I think that this threat is serious? I do, and that's why I'm covering it. I do think it's serious, not to the existence of the United States, but due to the domino effect that is possible. And I think that's the one reason why we have refrained in the past from actually already invading this island and taking out this dictator. I do think that is the right move if you could disable the nuclear weapons, but at the end of the day, that is a absolute massive risk, and the United States knows that, South Korea knows that, Japan knows that, Australia knows that, everybody knows that, and that's why a move hasn't been made. But at some point, man, you're going to have to disarm this lunatic. As crazy as Vladimir Putin is, he is reserved in the sense that he seems more strategic in the sense that he doesn't want a direct conflict with NATO. I know that could be in dispute. Some people think he does want that. I don't believe he wants that. I don't think he thinks he can win that war. And North Korea, at the end of the day, has to know. I mean, they have to know they can't win that war. It reminds me of the Japanese attacking America in Pearl Harbor and then dragging the Americans into the war. And they very much so realized if we're going to win this war, it has to be quick. And there's no way to win a war of attrition or a prolonged conflict with the United States. I still think that stands true with countries like North Korea. But the issue is, at the end of the day, Japan had no means to be able to end the conflict quickly. We had the Battle of Midway. We had attempts to be able to take out the American Navy, and that could have changed the path of the war and the trajectory of it, absolutely. And that was possible, but now it's like North Korea could potentially scare the United States bad enough with a few nuclear weapons shot off, and again, it opens Pandora's box into a way where it could even happen in the reverse. Say Russia reaches this stalemate. Russia has said many times that if they lose the war in Ukraine, they will use nuclear weapons. We've heard that time and time again. Medvedev, which I believe was their previous president before Putin, is constantly making these threats. So it's kind of like the boy who cried wolf. A lot of people just kind of shrug it off. Oh, it's just North Korea talking. Oh, it's just Russia talking. And that is all it is for now. But again, this scary reality of this is that it only takes one of these many flashpoints to pop off for the situation to become irreversible. And we don't even know what that could look like. How could we possibly defend South Korea if North Korea actually invades them? What would we do if they fire a nuclear weapon even into the ocean, or say they fired at Japan? That's a likely target. We know that. What would happen? End of the day, I believe America stomps North Korea, but I believe that North Korea would never go up without a nuclear fight. That is 100%. There's argument with Russia. Would Russia be so crazy that if they end up losing the war, they would use the nuclear weapons? It's possible. It's also possible no, and that's a bluff. Whereas North Korea stands, when you have someone who thinks he's a god and he's in possession of this many nuclear weapons, and the poor people in his nation who are at his whim, is beck and call, and it's not due to their own. Well, we don't know, I guess, for sure. Many of them probably do believe he's a god and do follow him and believe that he is this benevolent leader. But in all likelihood, the majority of people are just too scared to speak out. And I forget the woman's name who escaped from North Korea and came on Joe Rogan's podcast and kind of talked about how bad it was growing up there. I mean, it was from so many terrible things. I really recommend you guys just search on YouTube North Korea defector Joe Rogan episode. I can't remember her name, but man, did she tell a crazy story. And the reality of what's going on in North Korea is just profoundly disturbing. I mean, these guys many of them had never even seen photos before. They never even seen a trash can. They're eating out of the woods, trying to stay alive. And it's just, it's absolutely insane that is existing in 2023. And it's just this weird situation. It's like out of a fucking movie. There's no way to stop him because he's got nukes. And I don't remember how they got nukes. Somebody can kind of maybe brush me up on my history as far as how North Korea, I would imagine it was China that helped that out. China has always treated North Korea as like their puppet state, and that's what makes this so scary, because let's say North Korea is just threatening and they don't make a move, but that eventually maybe during the election year next year in 2024, China decides to go for Taiwan. Do you really believe the American military can spread itself that thin to be able to fight a conflict in the Korean Peninsula, the Pacific, with Taiwan, and also defend the Ukraine and the Russia-Ukraine war? It's not possible, in my opinion. We're so stretched thin. We do not have the military that we did in the in the pinnacle of World War II. We don't have that anymore. And even then, it was extremely dicey what was going to happen at first when we had to split the military between Europe and fighting Japan. Now imagine trying to fight Iran, and imagine trying to fight North Korea, imagine trying to fight Russia and China simultaneously. And you better believe that these countries are smart enough that they've thought this through, and they say the only way that we can beat America is if we split them amongst themselves. Right now we're clearly spending so much money on Ukraine, not here to argue about the morality of it, simply here to talk about the practicality of we've already had to resort to cluster munitions because we've openly stated we do not have the artillery rounds to continue to pour into Ukraine at the rate that they need to succeed in the war. So now imagine splitting that front both financially and militarily, economically, among 2 flashpoints. And then say that sparks into 3 flashpoints. This Axis powers that is formed for this potential global war that is heating up, it's a new chess game. It's different. Nuclear weapons really does open up a new development in combat in the potentiality, the potential conflict that is brewing. It's more dangerous than World War II times a million. And I don't think that's an understatement. If you guys want to correct me, I'm open to hearing statements to the contrary, but I believe that the danger is real. And while these do seem like just threats, empty, hollow words, and the boy who cried wolf, eventually the wolf does come. And while it hasn't happened in our lifetime yet, thank God, a human lifetime is short, under 100 years. And, we haven't even had nuclear weapons 100 years. So I forget who made the statement. I was listening to Dan Carlin on Hardcore History, and I forget who made this statement in the past about nuclear weapons of saying, we've walked a tightrope for 20 years successfully, and that's great, but it would be absolute madness to expect somebody to stay on that tightrope for 100 years, forever. Eventually a mishap will happen. Eventually a conflict will happen. It is in human nature, in the powers that be, to use the weapons that they possess. And while we are the only country to this day who has ever used nuclear weapons, that's going to change, guys. It's going to change, and I pray that it doesn't happen. All we can hope at this point is that somehow we're able to disarm North Korea, but short of an invasion or a first strike on North Korea, I guarantee you the administrations have always been perplexed by the situation. I guarantee you they've war gamed this out in 100 ways, but at the end of the day, it's like, how do you stop a dictator with nuclear weapons, even if he is conventionally much weaker than America in the West and NATO? That doesn't even matter in a sense if the war starts in a nuclear way, or if North Korea is backed into a corner, or if Russia is backed into a corner. They may just say, these guys are old. Putin's 70, 71 years old. So eventually these guys are going to be like, I don't have much time left. Kim Jong-un's got to realize his days are numbered. I don't know how old he is, but he's not going to stay the dictator of North Korea forever. And I do believe he and maybe even Vladimir Putin and Kim Jong-un, they would prefer to go out with a bang. And maybe Kim Jong-un wouldn't use a nuke. I'm sorry, not Kim Jong-un. Maybe Xi Jinping would not use a nuke. But it is possible that he will want to have this legacy on his belt of going for Taiwan and reunifying Taiwan with China. And the second something like that were to happen, let's say during the election year, when you have so much divisive politics going on and so much civil dispute going on in the mainland of the United States, all it takes is China going for Taiwan, and then China tells its puppet vassal in North Korea, time for you to shoot a nuke off, time for you to draw the American Navy, which would happen. We'd probably take the bait on that one. I think it's more likely we would intervene in North Korea than we even would in Taiwan. And from there, if that happens, if any of those situations happen, North Korea, China, or Russia losing the war in Ukraine and resorting to nuclear weapons, I just think we're going to see shit in our lifetime that we have never been able to fathom except for in movies. And I always like to say this: one, I'm not an authority on this topic, but two, things don't always happen in a movie time frame. We've watched so many movies on these conflicts, and it kind of disrupts reality in the sense of our perspective is kind of warped. We think we have like a uneducated timeline of how wars brew. Even when World War II started with Hitler in Europe, they had 6 months where they called it the phony war, where nothing really happened. Things were just developing. And then before you know it, every country gets dragged in. I think that this is a similar circumstance, and the time frame might just not be what we would anticipate it to potentially be. So North Korea, it's a fucking scary situation, man, with a complex chess game is being played. The consequences are dire. The players are huge. And North Korea, while they could not stand up in a conventional war, you better believe that they believe that they could definitely do some damage to the United States. And then like WWE, they could tag in their allies in Russia and China and seek their assistance, and I do think they would answer the call, or vice versa. North Korea could be used as a distraction while China goes for Taiwan, or Russia makes a bigger grab into Ukraine. There's a lot of potential for bad things happening here, and that's why I cover this stuff. For me, it all stems from World War II, my interest in this, my fascination in this, because I think it's such a horrible thing. And I'm actually going to be doing my very first kind of like creative video series here soon, covering how I believe World War II could prevent World War III. The knowledge of what happened in World War II, reading the stories from the firsthand accounts of how bad life was for people back in that time, and how much a conflict can just broil out of control. And it can start in Europe, but then before you know it, America gets dragged in, NATO gets dragged in, and the entire world is at each other's throats. I believe that's possible, and not only do I believe it's possible, I believe it's likely. So I hope I'm wrong about that. I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts. Wrapping up, if you guys appreciate this type of content, maybe you like tuning in for the World War III stuff, but you don't like UFC, or you love UFC news, but you don't care about the UFO stuff, I keep these three subjects separate as much as I can, to make it easier on you guys. But if you do enjoy any of this type of content, do me a favor, just subscribe to the channel, click like on the video. If you're listening on the podcast apps, just click follow, leave me a 5-star review. And lastly, I started a little community group called Mixed Martial Arts on Discord. You can find the link in the description to this video. And it's just a little group. I think it's only like 14, 15 members right now, but we're growing slowly, from people all over the place sharing their thoughts, their experiences, interests, kind of just bonding over talking about these subjects. I love doing the monologues. I say this all the time. I love talking about this stuff, but at the end of the day, it's really fun to be able to hear multiple perspectives, and that's why I'm going to continue to have more guests on my show as we grow the channel, and I would love you guys to become a part of it. It's fun to be able to talk with people who share the same interest, bringing up questions, sharing news. We're going to be doing all kinds of community stuff together, playing games, watching the fights, doing spaces type shows that they have like on Twitter and Discord, where all of us can talk together rather than me just talking and you listening. So I'm looking forward to that. But we'll be back with another episode tomorrow, probably UFO related. So tune in for that if you guys are interested. Thank you guys so much for being here. Have a good day, and let's hope we do not have a nuclear war. Peace out.